State agencies working together as a part of a new plan to stop terrorism and targeted violence. Hear from a Homeland Security official on the steps the state is taking to keep communities safe. Hello and welcome to Empire State Weekly. I'm Jamie DeLine in Albany. In response to increasing violence in the state, officials with multiple state agencies are launching a new plan to stop so-called targeted violence. The plan coordinates multiple state agencies to identify potential high-risk actors before they act. The state will then work to bring community and social services together to identify groups or individuals that disrupt potential violence. The goal of the new targeted violence prevention strategy aims to stop incidents like the mass shootings that happened earlier last year at the Tops Market in Buffalo and at a Subway in Brooklyn. Joining us now to give additional insight into the state's targeted violence prevention strategy is Jackie Bray. She is the commissioner of the New York State Division of Homeland Security and Emergency Services. Jackie, welcome. Thank you so much for being here.
Thanks so much for having me, Jamie.
So first off, what is targeted violence?
Targeted violence is any type of violence that begins as a grievance, whether that's a personal or an ideological grievance, and it accelerates from there, from a grievance to violence. Almost all mass shootings, almost all terrorism, even some types of domestic violence can be considered targeted violence.
So what exactly is the state's strategy to combat this?
So what we're doing is really a pivot from a post 9/11 mindset of how we manage and resource Homeland Security to a new way of looking at these issues that puts a huge emphasis on prevention, but it also puts an emphasis on multidisciplinary work so that we're not only asking law enforcement to engage before something happens, but we're really asking all different sectors and groups in society to engage to try to prevent violence before it occurs.
So would that involve red flag laws that were recently passed?
Absolutely. Part of what this strategy will employ are things like ERPO and TERPO, those red flag laws here in New York State. And obviously we've significantly increased, the state police particularly has significantly increased the use of those. But it's also going to involve what we call threat assessment and management teams. These are teams that bring together law enforcement, mental health counselors, school counselors, major employers in an area, civic society like like the Humane Society or faith-based groups, to really help figure out what's going on and how do we intervene before someone moves from grievance or ideation or radicalization to an actual act of violence.
Now, we're approaching almost a year since the mass shooting in Buffalo. How has the state's response changed since then?
Yeah, well, we've done really three things. The first thing we did is obviously those red flag laws and additional laws about guns. You know, the truth is, until we see national federal action on gun control, we are going to be behind the eight ball when it comes to mass shootings like we saw in Buffalo. But the other things the state did was really take steps to invest in domestic terrorism prevention. The threat environment today is more diverse, and it is coming from, the knock is coming from inside our home. Our domestic violent extremists are the #1 terrorist threat to New Yorkers, certainly, and across the country. We've started the Domestic Terrorism Prevention Unit. We've rolled out this targeted violence strategy, and we are launching threat assessment and management teams all over the state to try to move our attention and move our focus to prevention.
So what exactly will those people do?
So what they'll do is when an agency in a community has someone that they're really worried about, that maybe they've started radicalizing and the school can tell that they're radicalizing, but they haven't committed a crime in the way that law enforcement could step in, what it does is it allows groups that have resources to bring to bear to help off-ramp people. I always think about this as sort of a highway, and what we're trying to do is build off-ramps and help shove people off that highway, off that sort of radicalization process before they get to violence. And what it's going to do is help facilitate that. What it'll also do is give us a guide at the state of how we can help localities and help our counties spend a lot of that counterterrorism dollars that are coming in from the federal government And we're going to be developing trainings for all of us so that we are not bystanders, so that if we have someone in our life that we love, that we think is on a path towards violence, we have the tools that we need to help intervene ourselves.
Now, if someone does realize that, okay, my loved one might be heading down this wrong path, where should they reach out?
Yeah, it's a great question. It's gonna depend on where they are in the state, right? Obviously, if you think your loved one is a threat to themselves or others, you should call law enforcement. That's the number one thing we need you to do. But if you think that your loved one is in a rabbit hole online or going down a bad path or believing in these white supremacist, anti-Semitic, anti-government ideologies that are leading people towards violence and you want to get them help, you should also be looking for social service, mental health, and really community connections. What we see is that people need to be in community with other people. But we are, over the next several years, going to be rolling out programs statewide and helping our localities have really concrete answers to that question.
Now, I know you mentioned online.
Yeah.
Do you guys monitor social media? What is that looking like from your department?
So the New York State Intelligence Center, which is led by the state police, has officials that do monitor extremist groups online, whether those are extremist groups or global jihadist groups or those extremist groups or domestic violent extremists. We are monitoring extremist groups online. So is the FBI and so are other law enforcement entities. And we're coordinating to do everything we can to intervene before something happens. There have been some high-profile incidents this year where law enforcement has been able to intervene, but the other truth in this work is that almost all of our successes don't get talked about, but any of our failures are front-page news.
Is there anything else that you think New Yorkers really need to know when it comes to this prevention strategy?
I think that New Yorkers should know that the number one thing that we can all do to prevent violence in our communities, and targeted violence in particular, is to be constantly engaged with each other and to be constantly looking to help each other. And that if they have someone in their life who they fear is going down a path towards violence, that there are things that they can do and there is help in their community, and the state and Governor Hochul are completely 100% invested to building out that help and making it more accessible.
Are you guys looking for any funding from the state budget when it comes to these prevention strategies?
So our budget has about $10 million in it this year in order to be able to make grants out to the counties to help them run threat assessment and management teams, to help them implement domestic terrorism prevention plans. I expect that to be in our final budget, but certainly we require those resources to support the counties in this work.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Jackie.
Yeah,
Thanks
of course.
for being here.
Yeah, my
we
pleasure.
Really appreciate it.
My pleasure.
Turning to the Office of the Inspector General into a public-facing watchdog organization. Coming up, Ryan Peterson sits down with the Inspector General Lucy Ling to talk about her strategies for the office 1 year into the revamp. If you have a comment or story idea, let us know. You can email us at news@news10.com. You can also reach out on Twitter at WTEN. Welcome back to Empire State Weekly. I'm Jamie DeLine in Albany. The New York Inspector General's office has jurisdiction over most public authorities and is empowered to investigate corruption and other criminal activity in and outside the state government. The new Inspector General, Lucy Ling, says she wants to change the office into a public-facing statewide watchdog agency. Empire State Weekly's Ryan Peterson caught up with the IG earlier this week to talk about the changes she's working to make.
And joining us now, New York State Inspector General Lucy Ling. Madam Inspector, thanks for coming in. Nice to see you.
So nice to see you.
Nice
Thanks for having me.
to meet you. So let's talk about this, because I think this is an office not many of our viewers, not many people around the state are very familiar with, and that's something you're looking to change.
That's exactly right. It is such an exciting time to serve in New York State government because New Yorkers are hungry for more information about how the systems that are designed to support them are serving them. And that's exactly what the mission of the Inspector General's office is.
So let's talk about the big differences, because I think people know the Attorney General as the state's, chief legal counsel, chief prosecutor, if you will. You're a former prosecutor yourself, ADA down in the Manhattan DA's office. What are the big differences between the AG and the IG's office?
At the offices of the Inspector General, we include the New York State Inspector General, which has oversight over all the state executive agencies and authorities, including over gaming. We also have the offices of the Welfare Fraud Inspector General and the Workers' Compensation Fraud Inspector General. So all of our mission is oriented towards supporting the most vulnerable New Yorkers and making sure that the systems designed to protect them are working properly.
So to put simply, a state agency watchdog.
That's
if you
exactly
will,
right.
Right? And you recently implemented, in the vein of transparency, I think you're calling it the data portal, or public information portal, where you're releasing all of your reports, but also decades worth that predated your time in the office.
That's right. At the conclusion of our investigations, we issue public reports or letters to agencies that include information, suggested regulatory changes, et cetera. And so we have been publishing them essentially contemporaneously since I took office. But as you say, we have gone back and published many, many years worth of previous information, seeking to lift the veil over what's been happening for all these years in Albany and across the state.
You've been in office since the fall of 2021, correct?
Since November of 2021.
I would think the biggest thing that people might be most familiar with the office recently was the report that was issued in regards to the Schoharie tragedy from 2018. That was a massive report that I think a lot of people were anxious to see.
As a former prosecutor, I responded to the scene of vehicular homicides myself and am deeply aware of the devastation caused by that kind of crash. And the report really speaks for itself about all of the things that went wrong that contributed to that devastating tragedy.
Your office also takes complaints from people around the state to investigate. How many complaints does the office typically receive a year?
We receive about 5,000 complaints a year and growing, and I encourage all New Yorkers who have concerns about the integrity of state agencies to reach out to us at 1-800-DO-RIGHT, or to follow us on social media and to communicate complaints there at New York State IG.
Is there any one area that kind of sees the lion's shares of complaints since you've been in office?
I have made no secret of the fact that the majority of our complaints are related to the Department of Corrections, and those come from incarcerated New Yorkers, their families, advocates, but also from corrections officers and staff. We work closely with the Department of Corrections to ensure that the facilities that house vulnerable New Yorkers who have been convicted of crimes are following the appropriate rules and regulations, and will continue to do just that.
What are some of the things, one of the most recent reports too that just came out, you found fraud on behalf of, and help me out here. So I just read it, was it a Medicare, Medicaid fraud report that you just released not too long ago? Was it last March?
We do handle a number of public assistance fraud type cases, and when we find that there has been fraud that rises to the level of criminality, we work closely with local prosecuting authorities, with federal and state law enforcement to make sure that people are prosecuted and held responsible, and wherever possible, we work to get restitution so that the state gets money back for folks who are defrauding those systems that are so crucial for New Yorkers who need support.
What have you heard from people since you've taken office and you've kind of put forward this new public face, wanting people to realize more of what the office does? Have you heard any sort of positive feedback, especially since you've started to make those reports easily accessible?
People are excited to learn about what happens behind the closed doors of government agencies, and it has been incredibly heartening to hear New Yorkers talk about how glad they are to be able to see the data about how their taxpayer dollars are being spent by the watchdog agency. And we're continuing to look for ways to be more transparent, to communicate more effectively with the public, to work with community groups, and we welcome input from the public about better ways to serve.
Not that you have any involvement in the process, but how about budgeting and getting the budget passed on time? Any thoughts?
I feel very fortunate that I have nothing to do with the budget process.
And we shall see. A couple of weeks late now, and only time will tell. Inspector General Lucy Lang, thank you so much for visiting. We appreciate it.
Thank you for having me, and it's a pleasure.
Thank you, Ryan. Coming up, a new mandate is set to take effect that will see public schools remove imagery and names related to Native Americans. The details on a change that will impact over 100 schools statewide. Welcome back to Empire State Weekly. I'm Jamie DeLine in Albany. Following a final vote from the State Board of Regents, a mandate requiring public schools to remove Native American imagery from team names and official logos will soon be in effect. According to one source, over 100 schools across New York will need to make changes or risk losing state aid. Capitol correspondent Amel Taleji has reaction.
Our identity is being used predominantly by non-Native people for their amusement and entertainment. And oftentimes it's just terribly inaccurate.
I'm told the goal for schools across the state is to come up with an action plan by the end of this school year and to actually eliminate any Native American mascots or team names by the end of next school year. When the directive was first issued, some schools challenged it, which is why John Kane, Native activist and Indigenous Mascot Advisory Council member, says the mandate is necessary.
Between you and me, I think there were schools that were hoping this would come, because it becomes very tumultuous. There's a lot of anger that gets expressed between the people who say, yeah, it's time we got rid of the mascots, and the people who say, no, damn it, I'm going to be an Indian for the rest of my life, or whatever their mascot is.
Kane tells me the council will be a part of the rebranding process, and if schools don't comply, the education department could pull back on funding.
That's not something that NYSED wants to do. So I think going forward, what's going to be interesting is to see how NYSED does work with some of the schools who may not want to comply with this ban now, and what's that negotiation going to look like?
Some have said if the mascots are removed, the history and knowledge of Native Americans would also be removed, which Kane says is absurd.
And I would argue that being used as mascots is more of an erasure than removing the mascots, because they are misrepresentations. They are false stereotypes. They're all 18th century depictions. So that means we're automatically being cast as relics of the past, not that we aren't a living, breathing, existing contemporary people.
The name change would be a financial matter, with schools needing to change out gymnasium floors, school attire, and more. Senate Majority Leader Andrea Stewart-Cousins says there's been no discussion about including this in the budget. Reporting in Albany, Amel Taleji.
Thank you, Amel. Almost 3 weeks after it was due, the New York State budget is still late. Lawmakers continue to debate certain issues in the budget before it heads to the governor's desk for a signature. After passing an extender last week, the new deadline is Monday, the 24th. When asked on potentially making compromises to get the budget passed, here's what Majority Leader Andrea Stewart-Cousins had to say.
So, I, try and offer things. The speaker tries to offer things. We all, the governor's got things. So we're all offering things. So I wouldn't say more or less compromise. We're just trying to get through so that, again, we walk out with not only something that supports the New Yorkers in terms of what they expect a budget to be, but if we are going to do policy, that we come out with a policy that also reflects what New Yorkers need.
She also went on to say she hopes lawmakers will be at the beginning of the end of budget discussions very soon. This is now the latest the budget has been in 13 years. After Judge Rowan Wilson was promoted to chief judge, the state needed a new associate judge. The Senate confirming Caitlin Halligan to the position this week. New York State now has a new judge on its highest court.
Ayes 47, nays 12.
The nominee, Caitlin Halligan, is confirmed as associate judge of the Court of Appeals.
The confirmation taking place after a hearing was held on Tuesday, where Halligan introduced herself and shared her experience in law, which includes working with gun violence prevention groups. But that's not all.
Working alongside the Manhattan DA's office to defend its subpoena of former President Trump's tax records, a case that for me was about the rule of law, and filing a brief on behalf of the National Women's Law Center and more than 60 other organizations on behalf of the U.S. women's soccer team's fight for equal pay.
As an attorney, Halligan has argued many times before the Supreme Court as well as the New York State Court of Appeals. She took questions about her past cases during the hearing.
In whatever capacity I represented a client, I have done my best to bring to the court whatever arguments there are on that client's behalf.
Both Democrats and Republicans commenting how impressed they were with her qualifications.
Caitlin Halligan will make a fantastic Court of Appeals judge. She will be an inspiration for young lawyers, particularly women, across the state, and I'm sure the court can become the best appellate court in the nation with her on the bench.
Caitlin Halligan certainly is probably the most experienced appellate attorney we have possibly seen as a nominee for the Court of Appeals.
After the confirmation vote, Halligan briefly spoke to reporters.
I am very grateful and honored. Thank you.
Stick around, we'll be back with a look at the week ahead in just a bit. Finally, on Empire State Weekly, after several meetings held around the state getting the public's input, the Independent Redistricting Commission voting to send the final proposed assembly redistricting map to the state legislature. If they approve it, the districts will be altered for the next election. If it's not approved, it will come back to the commission for revision and submission. Both the Senate and Assembly will likely vote on the maps next week. We'll be sure to bring you the latest updates and reaction. For now, from all of us here on Empire State Weekly, I'm Jamie DeLine in Albany. We'll see you next week. And don't forget, you can watch Empire State Weekly all over New York State. Here's the full schedule of Empire State Weekly on 10 television stations across New York.